I moved to the city the same week I turned 25, which felt symbolic in a way I didn't fully understand yet. Like I was closing one version of myself and stepping into another without really knowing what I was carrying over. New apartment, new job, new routines. No one knew me here. That was the point. Back in my old city, I had this blog. Nothing huge, nothing viral, just a quiet corner of the internet where I wrote about my life like it mattered more than it actually did. Late night posts, overthinking everything, half confessions disguised as stories. A few people followed it consistently, but I never imagined it meant anything beyond that. I stopped writing before I moved. Didn't even post a goodbye. Just disappeared. I told myself I'd outgrown it. That I didn't need a space to spill everything anymore. That I could be someone quieter, more put together. Someone who didn't need strangers to understand him. For the first few weeks in the new city, I leaned into that. I kept to myself. Went to work. Came home. Explored a little on weekends, but nothing too social. I told coworkers just enough about me to seem normal, but never enough to feel exposed. It was working, until I met Clark. It happened in the most random, unimpressive way possible. A small bookstore cafe about 10 minutes from my apartment. I'd started going there on Sundays because it felt safe. Quiet music, people minding their own business, no pressure to talk. That day, I was sitting by the window, laptop open but untouched, staring at a blank document like I was considering writing again. I wasn't. I just liked the idea of it. "You're not going to type anything, are you?" The voice came from my left. I turned, slightly annoyed, already preparing some polite, dismissive response, but it stopped halfway in my throat when I saw him. Clark. He looked normal. That's the best way I can describe it. Dark hair, slightly messy. Hoodie, sleeves pushed up. A book tucked under his arm. The kind of guy you wouldn't look at twice in a crowd, but once you noticed him, something about him stuck. "Sorry," I said. He nodded at my screen. "You've been staring at that for, 10 minutes. I blinked. "You've been watching me for 10 minutes? "Not in a creepy way," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "I just come here a lot." "You're new." That caught my attention. "How do you know I'm new?" He smiled slightly. "You sit like you're visiting. Not like you belong yet." That was uncomfortably accurate. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And you're an expert on that?" "Yeah," he said. "I used to do the same thing." Something in his tone made it hard to be defensive. "So what?" I said, trying to keep it light. "You just go around analyzing strangers now. Only the ones who look like they're about to write something they won't finish." I huffed a quiet laugh despite myself. "Okay," I admitted. "Maybe you're not wrong." He nodded like he'd expected that. "I'm Clark," he said, shifting his book to his other hand. "Miles." We shook hands, brief, casual, and he glanced at the empty chair across from me. "Mind if I sit?" I hesitated for a second. Old instinct. Say no. Keep things simple. Don't complicate your quiet life. New city, new version of me. Say yes. "Sure." He sat down, setting his book on the table. "What were you going to write?" he asked. "Nothing," I said too quickly. He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something." I shrugged. "Just old habits, I guess." "Like journaling?" "Something like that." He studied me for a moment, not in a judgmental way, more like he was trying to place something. "You stopped," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Why?" I looked out the window, watching people pass by. Didn't feel necessary anymore. Clark nodded slowly, like he was filing that answer away. "Or," he said, "it started feeling too honest." I glanced back at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. People don't usually stop doing things that help them unless those things start getting a little too close to something real. I stared at him. "You always talk like this." "Only when I'm right." That made me smile. Just slightly. We talked for maybe another 20 minutes after that. Nothing intense. Just small things. Work, the city, how long he'd been here. He was easy to talk to in a way that didn't feel forced, which was rare. When he stood up to leave, he picked up his book and hesitated. "You're going to write again," he said. I shook my head. "I don't think so." He smiled, but there was something knowing in it. "Yeah," he said. "You will." And then he left. I didn't think much of it at first. Just a random interaction. A guy at a cafe. A slightly strange conversation. But later that night, lying in bed, staring at my ceiling in my too quiet apartment, I found myself opening my laptop again. Not to write, just to look. I scrolled through old files. Old drafts. half-finished posts I'd never published, pieces of myself I'd boxed up and labeled as before. And then I saw it. A comment. Old. Months back. From a username I didn't recognize. If you ever stop writing, I think it'll be because you're scared someone actually understands you. I froze. I hadn't replied to it back then. Hadn't even thought about it much. But now, sitting there in the dark, something about it felt different. Familiar. The next Sunday, I went back to the cafe. I told myself it was routine, that I liked the place. Not that I was expecting him to be there. But he was. Same table, same hoodie, same book. He looked up as I walked in, like he already knew. You came back, he said. I exhaled a quiet laugh. So did you. I ordered my coffee and walked over, sitting across from him without asking this time. We sat in comfortable silence for a minute. Then he tilted his head slightly. You remembered something, he said. It wasn't a guess. How do you do that? I asked. Do what? Talk like you already know what's going on in my head. He smiled faintly. I don't, he said. I just recognize patterns. I leaned forward slightly, studying him. Okay, I said slowly. Then tell me this. He waited. Have we met before? For the first time since I'd seen him, Clark hesitated. Not long. Just enough. Then he said, not exactly. That answer didn't sit right. What does that mean? He tapped his fingers lightly against his book, like he was deciding something. Then he looked at me. Really looked this time. I used to read something, he said. My stomach tightened slightly. What kind of something? A blog. My heart skipped. There were posts, he continued, about feeling invisible in your own life. About wanting to start over, but not knowing what you'd lose in the process. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Clark's voice softened, just a little. You stopped writing without saying anything, he said. And then, you're miles right. Everything in me went still. Because suddenly, this wasn't a random guy in a cafe anymore. This was someone who had known me. Before I ever knew him. I didn't answer him right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because there were too many things hitting me at once. That comment. The way he phrased everything. The fact that he wasn't guessing. He knew. Say something, Clark added quietly. I blinked, forcing myself back into the moment. How long? I asked. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Since the middle, I think. Not from the very beginning. I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. That's weird. Yeah, he agreed. I know. There was no defensiveness in him. No apology either. Just honesty, sitting there between us. You could have told me, I said. I almost did. Last week. Why didn't you? He shrugged slightly, eyes dropping to the table. I wanted to see if you'd bring it up first. That's not fair, I said. I know, he replied. But neither is recognizing someone who doesn't know you exist. That landed harder than I expected. I looked at him more carefully now, not as a stranger, but as someone who had been there. Quietly, watching pieces of me I'd written late at night, thinking no one really saw them. What did you think of it? I asked. My blog. Clark smiled faintly, but it wasn't light. It felt like reading someone who was trying really hard to be understood without actually asking for it. I swallowed. That sounds about right. He nodded. You were good at it, he added. At making people feel like they knew you. Did you? I asked. The question came out more direct than I intended. Clark didn't hesitate this time. I thought I did. Silence settled between us. The cafe noise filled the gaps. Coffee machines, quiet conversations, someone laughing in the corner. Everything felt normal except for the fact that my past had just sat down across from me and was looking me in the eyes. I stopped for a reason, I said eventually. I figured. I didn't like how exposed it made me feel. Clark tilted his head slightly. But that was the point, wasn't it? Yeah, I admitted. And that's exactly why I couldn't keep doing it. He watched me for a second, then nodded slowly. That makes sense. No argument. No pushing. Just understanding. That should have made it easier. It didn't. What about you? I asked. Why were you reading it? He exhaled quietly, like the question carried more weight for him than he expected. Same reason anyone reads something like that, I guess. Which is, he hesitated. Then, because it felt familiar. I frowned slightly. Familiar how? Clark leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the window. You wrote about things I didn't really know how to explain at the time, he said. About feeling out of place even when everything in your life technically made sense. About wanting something different, but not knowing what that actually looked like. I didn't interrupt. You made it feel less weird, he added. That caught me off guard. I did. Yeah. He glanced back at me, a small, almost embarrassed smile on his face. I never commented much. Just read. I thought about that. About all the names and usernames I'd skimmed past without really seeing. About how many people might have been there, quietly connecting to something I never fully understood myself. Except once, I said. Clark's expression shifted slightly. The comment, I continued. About me being scared someone actually understands me. He didn't deny it. That was you. Yeah. I let out a soft breath, shaking my head. That's kind of intense. I didn't think you'd ever see it again, he admitted. Neither did I. We both smiled at that, but there was something heavier underneath it. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. So what now? I asked. Clark raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I gestured vaguely between us. This is not a normal situation. No, he agreed. It's not. You know things about me I didn't even tell people back home. You chose to write them, he said gently. That doesn't make it less weird. I know. There was that honesty again. No excuses. No trying to soften it. Just truth. I studied him for a second. You ever think about reaching out? I asked. To you? Yeah. Clark nodded slowly. A couple of times. What stopped you? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. You felt far away, he said. Like someone I wasn't supposed to step into the life of. That's ironic, I muttered. Why? Because I moved here to feel exactly like that, I said. Untouched. Unconnected. Like no one knew me. Clark looked at me for a long moment. And how's that going? I huffed a quiet laugh. Not great, apparently. He smiled properly at that. Yeah, he said. Apparently not. Another pause. But this one felt different. Less tense. More real. So, Clark said after a moment, are you mad? I considered that. Not mad, I said finally. Just thrown off. Fair. But I do have one question. Okay. Why didn't you say anything right away? When we first met. He thought about it. Then, because you looked like you were trying to start over, he said. And I didn't want to be the thing that pulled you back. That wasn't the answer I expected. You still ended up doing that, I pointed out. Yeah, he admitted. I guess I did. There was no guilt in his voice. Just acceptance. And for some reason, that made it harder to be upset. I leaned back again, crossing my arms. You know this changes things? Right. Clark nodded. Yeah. You're not just some random guy from a cafe anymore. I figured. I held his gaze. So what are you now? For the first time since this started, he looked unsure. Honestly, he said. Yeah. I don't know yet. That should have been frustrating. But it wasn't. Because neither did I. And maybe that was the most honest place we could have been. Clark picked up his book, tapping it lightly against the table. Can I ask you something? He said. Depends. Are you going to start writing again? I exhaled slowly, glancing at my laptop. The blank document was still there. Waiting. I don't know, I said. He nodded, like that was enough. Okay. He stood up then, same as last week. But this time, before leaving, he paused. If you do, he said, don't disappear again. I looked up at him. Why not? Clark held my gaze, something steady and quiet in his expression. Because some people were actually listening, he said. And then he walked away, leaving me there, with my past, my present, and something new I didn't quite know how to name yet. I didn't write that day, or the next, but something had shifted. It wasn't just that Clark knew about the blog. It was how he talked about it, like it had meant something real. Not just content. Not just words I threw into the void to feel less alone. It made me uncomfortable, because if someone like him had been reading, then maybe I hadn't been as invisible as I thought. And that ruined the whole narrative I'd built for myself. The next time I saw him wasn't planned. Tuesday evening. Same cafe, but later than usual. I'd stayed late at work and stopped by out of habit more than anything else. I almost didn't go in when I saw him through the window. He was sitting at a different table this time, closer to the back. Head down, reading. Completely absorbed. For a second, I considered turning around, pretending I hadn't seen him. But that felt cowardly. So I went in, ordered my coffee, and before I could overthink it, I walked straight over and sat across from him. Clark looked up immediately, like he'd sensed me before I even spoke. There you are, he said. That caught me off guard. Was I supposed to be somewhere? I asked. He shook his head, smiling slightly. No, just figured you'd either come back or avoid me. Which one were you hoping for? This one. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my cup. Good, I said. Because avoiding you felt a little dramatic. Agreed. We sat there for a moment, quieter than before, but not awkward, just aware. So, he said eventually, closing his book, did you write? Straight to it. I huffed a small laugh. No. He didn't look surprised. Why not? I don't know, I admitted. It feels different now. How? I hesitated. Then, before, it felt like I was talking to no one, I said. Now it feels like someone might actually be listening. Clark tilted his head slightly. And that's a bad thing? It is when you don't know who that someone is. You know me now. Yeah, I said. And that somehow makes it worse. That made him smile. Because now I'll be thinking about you reading it. And I don't know if I like that. He leaned back, studying me. You're not used to being seen like that, he said. It wasn't a question. No, I replied. Clark nodded slowly. That makes sense. Again, no pressure. No pushing. Just understanding. It was starting to feel like a pattern with him. You don't argue much, I pointed out. What's there to argue about? I don't know, I said. Most people would try to convince me to start writing again. I don't need to convince you, he replied. You're already thinking about it. I looked at him. You're kind of annoying. I've been told. I smiled despite myself. We drifted into easier conversation after that. Work stuff. The city again. Random things that didn't feel heavy. But the underlying tension didn't disappear. It just settled. At some point, Clark checked the time and sighed. I should go, he said. You always leave first. I like leaving things unfinished. That's a terrible habit. Or a good one, he countered. Depends how you look at it. He stood up, grabbing his book. Then he paused. You free this weekend? He asked. The question felt casual. But it wasn't. I think so, I said carefully. Why? There's a place I want to show you. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds suspicious. It's not, he said. Just different from this. I glanced around the cafe. And you think I need different? I think you're stuck in a loop, he said simply. That hit a little too accurately. So this is you trying to fix me? I asked. Clark shook his head. No, he said. Just giving you an option. I considered it. Every instinct told me to keep things contained. Predictable. Safe. But another part of me, the same part that had started writing in the first place, felt curious. Okay, I said. He nodded once, like he expected that too. I'll text you. We exchanged numbers quickly, nothing dramatic. And then he left. Again. I stayed there longer than I needed to. Thinking. About him. About the blog. About the version of me I thought I'd left behind. Saturday came faster than I expected. Clark texted me in the morning. Be ready at 11. No explanation. No details. Just that. I almost backed out. Stared at the message for a solid 5 minutes, debating whether I wanted to step into whatever this was becoming. But I didn't. At exactly 11, he was outside my building. Of course he was. I spotted him leaning against his car, hands in his pockets, looking completely unbothered. You're punctual, I said as I walked up. You're predictable, he replied. Not sure if that's a compliment. It's not. I rolled my eyes, but there was a smile behind it. Where are we going? I asked. You'll see. Still suspicious. Relax, Miles. That again. The way he said my name. Not like a stranger. Not even like someone new. Like he'd been saying it for a while. I noticed it more now. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it. The drive was quiet at first. Not awkward, just calm. The city slowly faded as we moved further out, buildings giving way to quieter streets, then open space. Okay, I said after a while. If this is where you murder me, I just want you to know I had a feeling. Clark laughed. You're not that important. Wow. Relax, he added. We're almost there. A few minutes later, he pulled over near what looked like nothing. Just an open area. Trees. A narrow path leading somewhere. This is it? I asked. Yep. That's not reassuring. He got out of the car. So I followed. We walked for a bit in silence. The noise of the city completely gone now. Just wind, distant sounds, something calmer. Then the path opened up. And I stopped. It was a view. Not dramatic in a touristy way, but wide, open, quiet. The kind of place you don't stumble on unless someone shows it to you. Okay, I said softly. This is actually good. Clark smiled slightly. I know. We stood there for a moment. No rush. No conversation needed. Just space. You come here a lot? I asked. Sometimes. With other people? He shook his head. Not really. That felt significant. Why me? I asked. He glanced at me. Because you write like someone who needs a place like this. I looked out at the view again. You talk like you've known me for years. Clark didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Feels like I have." That did something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. Not overwhelming, just noticeable. We stayed there for a while, talking a little, sitting in silence more. At one point, I found myself saying things I hadn't planned to say. About why I stopped writing. About how it started feeling less like expression and more like exposure. Clark listened, really listened, didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just stayed. And for the first time since moving here, I didn't feel like I had to control how much of myself I was showing. On the way back, the car felt different. Quieter, but heavier in a good way. Like something had shifted again. When he dropped me off, neither of us moved to get out right away. "Thanks," I said. "For what?" "For this." He nodded. "Anytime." I hesitated. Then, "You're not as random as I thought." He smirked slightly. "Took you long enough." I laughed. But then it faded a little. "Clark," I said. "Yeah. That comment you left." He looked at me. "You were right," I admitted. "About what?" I held his gaze. Maybe I did stop writing because I was scared someone actually understood me. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Not satisfaction. Something softer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." And that felt like the beginning of something I didn't fully understand yet. After that day, things didn't go back to how they were before. They didn't become something obvious either. It was in between. Clark and I started seeing each other more, but not in a structured way. No plans, no labels. Just showing up in the same spaces more often than coincidence could explain. The cafe became ours without either of us saying it out loud. Sometimes we'd sit together. Sometimes we'd sit at separate tables, exchanging small looks like there was some unspoken understanding between us. And somehow, that felt even more intimate than constant conversation. A few days after the drive, I opened my laptop again. Same blank document. Same cursor blinking like it was waiting for me to make a decision. This time, I didn't overthink it. I just typed. Not a full post. Not something polished. Just a few lines. I think the scariest part about starting over isn't losing people. It's realizing someone might still recognize you anyway. I stared at it for a while. Then closed the laptop. Didn't post it. Not yet. "You wrote something." Clark said it like a fact. We were back at the cafe. Late afternoon, quieter than usual. I froze for half a second. "How do you know that?" I asked. He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "You look different." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." I studied him, trying to figure out if he was guessing or if he really knew. "You're annoying," I muttered. "You've said that before." "Because it's still true." He smiled, setting his cup down. "So," he said, "are you going to post it?" I hesitated. "I don't know." "Why not?" "Because once I do, it's not mine anymore," I said. "It's out there again." Clark nodded slowly. "And that scares you?" "Yeah." He leaned back in his chair, watching me. "You know," he said, "you talk about your writing like it's something separate from you." "What do you mean?" "Like it's this thing you're releasing instead of something that's just part of who you are." I frowned slightly. "That's not the same thing." "It kind of is." I shook my head. "No, it's not. Writing it is one thing. Letting people see it is another." "Why?" "Because once people see it, they start forming opinions about you based on it." Clark tilted his head. "And that matters?" "It should matter to you too," I said. "You read it." "Yeah," he agreed. "And you formed opinions." I did. I crossed my arms. "Exactly." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "You want to know what I actually thought?" I hesitated, then nodded. Clark leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "I thought you were honest in a way most people aren't," he said. "But also careful." "Careful." "Yeah. Like you were always holding something back, even when you were saying a lot." That caught me off guard. I wasn't holding back. "You were," he said calmly. "You just didn't realize it." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped, because a small part of me knew he wasn't wrong. "There were things you never fully said," he continued. "You'd circle around them, get close, then pull back." I looked away. "That's kind of the point," I muttered. "Why?" "Because not everything needs to be fully exposed." Clark nodded, like he expected that answer. "Maybe," he said, "but the parts you avoided were always the ones that felt the most real." Silence. I didn't have a response for that, and I hated that. "You're doing it again," he added. "What?" "Avoiding." I looked back at him. "I'm not avoiding anything." He held my gaze. "Then tell me why you actually stopped." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "I told you already." "You gave me a version," he said. not the reason. That was frustratingly accurate. I exhaled slowly. I stopped because it started feeling like people knew me better than the people in my actual life, I said. Clark didn't interrupt. And that messed with me. I continued. Because it felt like I was more real online than I was in person. That was the part one didn't usually say out loud. It felt backwards. I added quietly. Clark nodded. Yeah, he said. I get that. I looked at him. You do? Yeah. How? He hesitated. Then, because I've had the opposite problem. I frowned. What does that mean? I'm very present in real life, he said. People know me. Talk to me. But I don't always feel understood in the way your writing made me feel. That shifted something. So you read my blog to feel understood? I said. Partly. And now you're sitting here telling me I should go back to that. I'm not telling you to do anything, he said. I'm just saying that maybe it wasn't as one-sided as you thought. I sat with that, because it changed the narrative again. It wasn't just me writing into nothing. There had been people on the other side. People like him. That's a lot to think about, I said finally. Good, Clark replied. I rolled my eyes. You're enjoying this. A little. Of course you are. He smiled. And then, softer. I just don't think you should run from something that was real. That word again. Real. It followed me more than I liked. That night, I didn't close the laptop. I opened the draft again. Read it. Added a few lines. Deleted some. Sat there for a long time, just thinking. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I posted it. No announcement. No explanation. Just a return. I stared at the screen afterward, heart beating faster than it should have. It felt stupid. It felt small. It felt huge. I didn't check for reactions. Didn't refresh. Just closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet. But my mind kept drifting to one thing. Clark. The next day, I saw him again. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me. And smiled. You posted, he said. I let out a breath. Yeah. He nodded once. Then, it was good. Something about the way he said it. Not exaggerated. Not overly emotional. Just certain. What did you think? I asked. Clark leaned back slightly. I think, he said, you still held something back. I stared at him. You're unbelievable. I'm honest. That's not always a good thing. It is with you. That hit differently. I looked away for a second, trying to ignore the way that landed. You didn't comment this time, I said. I didn't need to. Why not? Clark held my gaze. Because now I can just tell you. And somehow, that felt more personal than any comment ever could. After I posted again, something in me didn't relax the way I thought it would. I expected relief, closure, maybe even a sense of returning to something familiar. Instead, it felt like I'd reopened a door I wasn't fully ready to walk through. And the worst part? I kept thinking about Clark reading it. Not someone. Not an audience. Him. It changed everything. You're overthinking it. Clark said it casually, like he hadn't just read something I wrote at 2 in the morning that felt a little too close to the truth. We were sitting outside the cafe this time. Warmer weather, more people, more noise. I glanced at him. I'm not overthinking. You are. I'm not. You are, he repeated, completely calm. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Okay, I said. Maybe a little. He smiled. A lot. I ignored that. It's just, I hesitated. It feels different now. Because of me? I didn't answer right away. Clark didn't push. Yeah, I admitted finally. He nodded, like he expected that. Okay. That's it. I asked. Just okay? What do you want me to say? I don't know, I said. Something more complicated than that. He thought for a second. Then, you're not used to writing with someone specific in mind, he said. That's not true, I replied. I always had someone in mind. Yeah, he said. But it was always vague. Now it's not. That was exactly it. And I hated how easily he saw it. I don't like it, I said. Why? Because it makes me second-guess everything. Clark tilted his head. Or, he said, it makes you more honest. I frowned. How does overthinking make anything more honest? It doesn't, he said. But awareness does. I stared at him. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Talking like you've already figured me out. He smiled slightly. I haven't, he said. I just pay attention. That again. That quiet, steady way of being present. It was starting to feel dangerous. A few days later, something small happened that shouldn't have mattered, but did. I posted again. Another short entry. Nothing dramatic. But this time, I checked the comments. I hadn't planned to. I told myself I wouldn't. But curiosity won. There were a few new usernames, some familiar ones, people saying they missed my writing, that they were glad I was back. It felt strange, good, but distant, until I saw it. No username I recognized at first, but the comment, "You're still circling the same things, just saying them differently." I stared at it. Then I smiled, because I knew exactly who it was. "You couldn't help yourself," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. Clark didn't even look up from his coffee. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The comment." He glanced up, completely calm. "What comment?" I laughed under my breath. "You're not even going to try to hide it?" "I didn't hide it," he said. "I just didn't sign it." "Why?" He shrugged. "Felt more honest that way." "That makes no sense." "It does," he said. "If I said it here, you'd react to me, not the words." I leaned back, studying him. "And which one do you want?" "The words." That caught me, because it was true. If I hadn't known it was him, I would have taken it differently. Less personally, more objectively. "You're kind of manipulative," I said. "I prefer intentional." "Same thing." "Not really." I shook my head, but I was smiling. "You're impossible. And yet, you're still here." That landed softer than I expected. Things between us kept building, but not in a way I could clearly define. We weren't just friends, but we weren't anything labeled either. It showed up in small ways. The way he'd look at me when I said something honest without realizing it. The way I started noticing when he wasn't around. The way conversations lingered longer than necessary, like neither of us wanted to be the first to leave. And then there were moments like this one. "You disappeared yesterday," he said. "We were walking this time. No cafe, no structure, just moving through the city without really deciding where we were going." "I was busy," I said. "With work." He glanced at me. "That's not what I meant." I knew that, but I played along anyway. "What did you mean?" "You didn't answer my message." I exhaled. I saw it. And I didn't feel like talking. Clark nodded slowly. "Okay." No accusation. No frustration. Just acceptance. That almost made it worse. "You're not going to ask why?" I said. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." I stopped walking. He noticed, turning slightly to face me. "That's it?" I asked. "You're just going to leave it like that?" "What do you want me to do, Miles?" "I don't know," I said, a little sharper than I intended. "Push. Care more." His expression shifted slightly. "I do care," he said calmly. "I just don't force things out of you." That hit, because it was true, and because part of me wanted him to push anyway. I wasn't feeling great, I admitted after a second. "Why?" I hesitated. "Then, the blog," I said. "Coming back to it, it's messing with my head more than I thought it would." Clark nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I figured." I looked at him. "You always figure things out before I say them." "Not always," he said. "Just sometimes." "That's still annoying." He smiled slightly. "Come here." The words were quiet. Simple. I stepped closer without really thinking about it. And he hugged me. Nothing dramatic. Nothing intense. Just steady. Grounding. And for a second, everything in my head went quiet. I didn't even realize how much I needed that until it happened. When we pulled back, there was a pause. Not awkward. Just full. "You don't have to go through it alone," he said. I nodded. "Yeah," I said softly. "I know." And I did. That was the problem. I was starting to rely on that. On him. Later that night, I opened my blog again. Not to write. Just to read. Old posts. Old thoughts. Old versions of me trying to understand things I still didn't fully understand now. But this time, something was different. Before, it felt like I was looking at someone else. Now, it felt like I was looking at a version of myself that was still connected to who I was becoming. And somehow, Clark was part of that now. Not in the writing itself, but in how I understood it. And that realization? It stayed with me longer than I expected. Because it raised a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. Was I writing again because I needed it? Or because he saw me in a way I couldn't ignore anymore? The shift didn't happen all at once. It was quieter than that. The kind of change you only notice when you stop and look back. When something that used to feel uncertain suddenly feels expected. Clark became part of my routine. Not officially. Not in a way we ever talked about. But he was there. And I started noticing the absence when he wasn't. "You're staring again." I blinked, snapping out of it. Clark was sitting across from me, watching me with that same calm, slightly amused expression he always had when he caught me overthinking. "I'm not staring," I said. "You are." "I'm thinking." "Same thing with you." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't fully hide the smile. "Okay," I said. "Maybe I was staring." "At what?" I hesitated. Nothing. Clark leaned back, crossing his arms. That's not true. You always do this, I muttered. Do what? Make me say things I wasn't planning to say. I don't make you do anything, he replied. You just don't like leaving things unfinished. That was uncomfortably accurate. I exhaled. I was thinking about how this happened, I admitted. This? I gestured vaguely between us. Yeah, this. Clark didn't answer right away. Then, feels pretty natural to me. Exactly, I said. That's what's weird. He raised an eyebrow. Why is that weird? Because it wasn't supposed to be like this, I said. I moved here to keep things simple, detached. And now, I looked at him. And now I have someone who knew me before I even got here. Clark nodded slightly. Yeah. And somehow, I continued, you know me in a way people in my actual life didn't. That was the part that kept bothering me. Not in a bad way. Just deeply. Clark leaned forward a little. Can I say something? He asked. That depends. You're going to overanalyze it no matter what I say. True, I admitted. Go ahead. He held my gaze. I don't think I knew you, he said. I think I understood parts of you. That made me pause. That's different, he added. How? Knowing someone means seeing them in real life, he said. Understanding someone means recognizing something in them that feels familiar. I thought about that. So you didn't know me? I said. No, he replied. Not really. But you felt like you did. Yeah. I looked away for a second, processing that. Okay, I said slowly. That's slightly less terrifying. Clark smiled. Glad I could help. Later that evening, we walked again. It had become a thing without being a thing. No destination. Just movement. You've been writing more, he said. Yeah. How does it feel? I considered that. Less scary, I admitted. Still weird. Weird how? I keep wondering if I'm being honest or just trying to sound honest. Clark nodded. That's a good question. That's not helpful. It is, he said, because it means you're aware of it. I glanced at him. You really don't give simple answers, do you? Nope. Annoying. You've mentioned that. I smiled slightly. Then, after a moment, do you ever think about it? I asked. About what? My writing. Clark didn't hesitate. Yeah. What do you think now? He looked ahead, hands in his pockets. I think it's different. How? It feels less like you're trying to be understood, he said, and more like you're just saying things as they are. I frowned slightly. That sounds like the same thing. It's not, he said. Before, it felt like you were reaching. Now it feels like you're just there. I didn't fully understand that, but it stuck. A few days later, something shifted again. Small, but clear. We were at the cafe, sitting closer than usual, not intentionally, just naturally. Clark was reading. I was pretending to work, but mostly just watching him without realizing it. At some point, he looked up. You're doing it again. I know. You're not even denying it now. Nope. He smiled slightly. What is it this time? I hesitated. Then, you feel familiar, I said. The words came out before I could filter them. Clark didn't react immediately. Just watch me. That's interesting, he said. Why? Because I was thinking the same thing. Something in my chest tightened slightly. Yeah. Yeah. Silence settled between us. But it wasn't heavy. It was full. Do you think it's just because of the blog? I asked. Clark shook his head. No. Then what? He thought about it. Then, I think it's because we skipped the surface level, he said. That made sense. We didn't have that usual getting to know you phase. We started somewhere deeper. And now everything else was catching up. That should feel overwhelming, I said. Does it? I considered that. Then shook my head. No. Clark nodded. Yeah, he said. Same. That night, I wrote again. But this time, it wasn't about starting over. It wasn't about being lost. It wasn't even about the past. It was about him. Not directly. Not obviously. But in a way that anyone who really paid attention would understand. I didn't expect to meet someone who already recognized me in a place where I was trying to be unknown. I thought starting over meant being alone in a clean way. But maybe it just means meeting people who see you without needing an introduction. I stared at the words for a long time, then posted it. This time, I didn't hesitate. The next day, Clark didn't mention it right away. We sat, talked, normal, until, eventually, that one was honest. I looked at him. You say that like the others weren't. They were, he said. Just not like that. I held his gaze. You knew it was about you. It wasn't a question. Clark didn't deny it. Yeah, he said. Something shifted again. Quieter. Deeper. Does that bother you? I asked. No. Why not? He leaned back slightly. Because you didn't hide it, he said. I nodded slowly. Yeah. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to. We left the cafe together that evening, walking slower than usual, like neither of us was in a rush to break whatever this was. At some point, our hands brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It wasn't dramatic, just there. And somehow, that felt bigger than anything else that had happened so far. I glanced at him. He looked back. No jokes, no deflection, just quiet understanding. Hey, he said softly. Yeah. Are you still trying to start over? I thought about it, then shook my head. No, I said. Clark nodded. Good. And that was the moment I realized. I wasn't trying to leave my old self behind anymore. I was just becoming something new. And somehow, Clark was already part of it. After that moment, our hands brushing, neither of us pulling away, things didn't suddenly become something obvious. There was no conversation like, what are we? No label. No clean transition. Just awareness. And somehow, that made everything feel more real. We started sitting closer without thinking about it. Walking slower. Texting more, but not in a forced way, just small things throughout the day that felt natural. It wasn't intense. It was steady. And that steadiness was new for me. You're quieter lately, Clark said it one evening as we sat by the window in the cafe. I glanced at him. That's not true. It is, he said, but not in a bad way. I leaned back slightly. What does that even mean? It means you're not trying to fill every silence anymore. I frowned. I didn't do that. You did, he said calmly. At the beginning. I thought about it. And yeah, maybe I had. I think I was trying to control things, I admitted. Clark nodded. Yeah. And now? I looked at him. Now I don't feel like I have to. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual. Good, he said quietly. That night, I didn't write right away. Instead, I found myself rereading everything I'd posted since I started again. Not critically, not overanalyzing, just noticing. The difference, the shift. It wasn't just about the words. It was about how they felt. Less distant, less constructed, more present. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, Clark had something to do with that. A few days later, something small happened that changed the dynamic again. We were walking, like usual. Same streets, same pace. But this time, there was a slight tension I couldn't ignore. Not bad, just there. You've been holding something back, Clark said. I let out a quiet breath. You always say that. Because it's usually true. I stopped walking. He did too. I'm not holding back, I said. He didn't argue. Just looked at me. Waiting. That was worse. Okay, I admitted. Maybe I am. Clark nodded slightly. Do you want to say it? I hesitated. Because once I did, there was no going back to the undefined version of this. I don't know what this is, I said finally. There it was. Clark didn't look surprised. Yeah, he said. That's it. I asked. Just yeah? What do you want it to be? I exhaled. I don't know. That's okay. I looked at him, a little frustrated. You're way too calm about this. I've thought about it already, he said. Of course you have. He smiled slightly. Do you want it to be something? He asked. The question landed deeper than I expected. Because it wasn't about definitions. It was about intention. I took a second. Then, yeah, I said. Clark's expression softened. Yeah, he repeated. We stood there for a moment, neither of us rushing to say more. Because somehow that was enough. The first time we kissed, it wasn't dramatic. No build-up. No perfect setting. Just a quiet pause in the middle of everything. We were standing outside my building, talking about nothing important. And then the conversation just stopped. Clark looked at me. I looked at him. And it felt obvious. So we kissed. Simple. Natural. Like it had already happened in some other version of this. And we were just catching up. When we pulled back, neither of us said anything right away. You overthinking? He asked softly. I smiled slightly. Not this time. He nodded. Good. After that, things didn't get complicated the way I thought they would. They got clearer. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But enough. We didn't need to define everything right away. Because it already felt like something. You're different. Clark said it a week later. We were back at the same spot he'd shown me outside the city. The view. The quiet. I glanced at him. You've said that before. Yeah, he said. But now I know why. Why? He smiled slightly. Because you're not trying to be understood anymore. I frowned. I still am. Not in the same way, he said. Now you just let things be what they are. I looked out at the view. That sounds like something you would say. It is something I'm saying. I laughed softly. Then, after a moment, I think I was waiting before, I admitted. For what? For someone to get it without me having to explain everything. Clark nodded. And now? I glanced at him. Now I don't feel like I have to wait. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. That night, I wrote again. But this time, it wasn't about confusion. It wasn't about fear. It was simple, clear. I used to think being understood meant saying everything perfectly. Now I think it just means being seen without trying so hard. And maybe that only happens when you stop writing for people who aren't there and start noticing the ones who are. I posted it without hesitation. Didn't second guess. Didn't overthink. Because for the first time, I knew exactly who I wasn't hiding from anymore. And that made all the difference. There was still one part left. Not dramatic. Not unresolved. Just the kind of ending that doesn't feel like an ending. Because some things don't really end. They just become something else. And I could feel we were getting close to that point. It didn't end with some big, cinematic moment. No dramatic confession. No turning point that changed everything overnight. It just settled. The last shift happened on a normal day, which felt right. Clark and I were at the cafe again. Same table. Same rhythm. He was reading. I had my laptop open, actually writing this time. Not staring, not hesitating. Just writing. At some point, I stopped. Not because I got stuck. Because I realized I didn't need to finish it right then. That's new. Clark said without looking up. What is? You stopped without overthinking. I glanced at him. You notice everything, don't you? Most things. I closed the laptop slowly. I think I'm done, I said. With the post. I shook my head. With trying to figure it all out. Clark looked up at that. Yeah. Yeah. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling quietly. For the first time, it doesn't feel like I need to explain everything to understand it, I said. He studied me for a second, then nodded. That's a good place to be. It is, I agreed. And it actually felt true. We didn't stay long after that. Didn't need to. Somehow, the conversations had gotten lighter. Not less meaningful. Just less heavy. Like we weren't carrying something unresolved anymore. That evening, we walked back toward my apartment. Slower than usual. Not because we were dragging it out, but because neither of us felt rushed. You know, I said. If you hadn't said anything, Clark glanced at me. About the blog? Yeah. This probably wouldn't have happened. He thought about it. Maybe, he said. I shook my head. No, definitely not. Why? Because I would have kept pretending I was someone new, I said. And you would have known I wasn't. Clark smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. That sounds about right. I looked at him. Why did you say something in the end? He didn't answer immediately. Then, because I didn't want to just be someone who knew you from a distance, he said. That landed. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm glad you didn't. We stopped outside my building. Same spot as before. But it didn't feel like a beginning anymore. It felt steady. You writing tonight? He asked. Probably. He nodded. Good. I hesitated for a second. Then, hey, I said. Yeah. Do you ever think about how weird this is? Clark smiled. Not really. Why not? Because it doesn't feel weird anymore. I thought about that. And he was right. It didn't. That night, I opened my laptop again. Blank page. But this time, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt open. I didn't overthink the words. Didn't try to make them perfect. I just wrote. I thought starting over meant becoming someone no one recognized. But it turns out, sometimes you meet someone who sees you before you even try to explain yourself. And instead of ruining the idea of a fresh start, they become part of it. I paused, then added one more line. Maybe the point was never to be unknown. Maybe it was just to be known in a different way. I read it once. Didn't edit. Didn't hesitate. And then, I posted it. The next day, I didn't check the comments right away. Didn't feel the need to. Instead, I went to the cafe. Clark was already there. Of course he was. You posted, he said like always. Yeah. He studied me for a second. You look different. I smiled slightly. You say that every time. Yeah, he said. But this time I mean it differently. How? He closed his book. You look like you're not waiting for anything anymore. I sat down across from him. And for a second, I just let that sink in. Because he was right. I wasn't waiting. Not for clarity. Not for understanding. Not for something to click into place. It already had. Hey, Clark said after a moment. Yeah. Do you regret it? What? Stopping before. The blog. I thought about it. Then shook my head. No. Why not? Because if I hadn't, I said, I probably wouldn't have ended up here. Clark nodded. And here is good. I looked at him. really looked. And this time, there was no hesitation. Yeah, I said. Here is good. He smiled. Not wide. Not dramatic. Just real. And that's the thing no one tells you about starting over. It's not about leaving everything behind. It's not about becoming someone completely new. It's about figuring out which parts of you were always worth keeping. And noticing who sees those parts without you having to fight for it. I moved to this city thinking I'd finally be unknown. Unseen. Untouched by who I used to be. But instead, I met someone who recognized me anyway. And didn't treat it like something I needed to run from. Just something that made sense. I still write. Not all the time. Not like before. But when I do, it feels different now. Less like I'm trying to be understood. More like I already am. And maybe that's because somewhere between the old version of me and the new one, I stopped writing for strangers and started living in a way that didn't need explaining. And Clark, he's still here. Not as a reader, not as someone on the outside, but as part of the story I didn't plan to tell. The one that didn't need a perfect beginning or a dramatic ending, just something real. And that turned out to be enough.